John di Martino, thank you very much for accepting my interview request. And it's an honor and a pleasure for me to meet you here in Groningen again now for the second time this week. And we are here in the Netherlands. I think it's the first time for you in the Netherlands, right?
No, I've been here, happy to be here again. I used to come here a lot with, when I played with Ray Barretto and New World Spirit. I remember playing in Amsterdam. Actually, I remember in Amsterdam we played at the Milkvek, you know. And, but also we played, there's a venue outside Amsterdam. It's called Nix. I'm forgetting, they do live radio broadcasts. And I remember us playing at another place in Holland too, but now I'm going blank, festival. So I've actually been here a couple times. But I've never been to Groningen. This is first time for me. Okay. And I want to thank you for having me. It's my honor and a pleasure to be here.
That's great. Well, you are teaching here at the Prince Claus Conservatorium, and you are a replacement for Spike Wilner.
That's right.
So it's a big surprise for everyone that you are here instead of Spike.
Right. Yeah, Spike has a new addition. He's become a family man.
Okay. Well, let's congratulate him then.
Yes, yeah. Congratulations, Spike. I think it's good for him. He has this glowing, happy energy all the time. So it's a very positive change in his life, I'm sure.
Yeah. Especially in the first weeks, right?
Yeah.
Well, this week you are part of the study program New York Comes to Groningen, which is initiated by Joris Teepe.
Right.
He's the bass player and educator and the head of the jazz department here at the Prince Claus Conservatorium. Well, was it a big surprise for you to come here to Groningen?
It was a bit of a...
And how did it go?
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. Joris and I have been out of contact for like almost 20 years. It's funny how New York is like that. It's a small geographical area, but because you just get involved in different circles and different projects and different directions, you may not see someone for like 20 years and you say, hey, were you living in Europe? He said, no, I've been here all the time. So we reconnected, and I was very happy when he called me. It's funny, I was originally nervous about the fact that I took the week because I returned very early on the 13th, but I had a concert that night in New York with a great saxophonist from Thailand. His name is Cole. And I was very nervous about the possibility. I realized I'm taking a chance. The flight could get delayed. But I feel like, I don't know, divine power stepped in. The concert got canceled. And I remember them saying they had some problems. And I said, we're seriously considering canceling the concert. And I said, I totally understand if you need to do that. And I was sort of relieved. And as it turned out, I'm going to make a recording with Cole the following day. But I feel at ease about this. But I was very happy when he called me, and I've been enjoying the week, really enjoying it. For me, teaching is a spiritual exercise because, you can help young people, maybe assist them in finding their way in life. And it's very beautiful to see these little epiphanies that they have. I mean, for example, there's two young students that play piano, but I had them to deal with an issue of improvising on a tune. I had encouraged them to sing, just accompany themselves and sing, to get more in touch with what their soul wanted to play. And I discovered in both of them that they have really magnificent voices. So they had an epiphany that they're going to start playing and singing. Like but I feel really good in some way if I could help facilitate things like that, And sometimes it's even beyond what they may do in music. It's just dealing with music is part of their own spiritual, psychological, emotional development. And I realize music can play that role as well. So teaching, I think, has all these dimensions, you know, and I always try to focus on, you know, of course, I make suggestions how they can improve what they're doing, but I always want these confrontations to be, if I borrow the words of Scott Peck, the writer, loving confrontations. You know, there's a quote from, I used to be involved in the Baha'i faith, there's a quote in the Baha'i writings, I'm going to paraphrase it, it's something, it says something like this: a kindly tongue cloaketh the words in meaning. So there's a way to confront people in a way to help them grow, but not make them feel, to not hurt them in a way. And even if I feel like I come on too strong, because sometimes you can be very passionate in teaching, like, you know, no, that's wrong, you need to do that this way. I always try to deflect that into a more positive energy, you know. So these are things I think about when I teach, you know, besides thinking about the content and what important aspects of the music they should be learning, you know.
Okay, well, you are a piano player, an arranger,
yes.
a producer, a composer, an educator. You are even a shape shifter.
I got that handle, yeah. I promise not to turn into an animal, do I?
And you're born in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Well, you should know all about the Philly sound, right?
Yeah, I know something about it.
and you live in New York City.
That's right.
How does your life look like today in New York? What do you like about living in the Big Apple, and what not, maybe? And maybe you can describe it a little bit about the mixture of languages, people, poetry, sounds, and smells.
Well, you know, I should tell you now, and for the past 12 years, maybe a little longer, I actually live right over the Lincoln Tunnel in New Jersey. But I really like it because I have this beautiful view of Manhattan, and I go into it almost every day. But I like also getting out of it because it's a little more peaceful, the side that I live on. And there are some really nice bounties of where I live in New Jersey. For example, nearby there are two very Korean immigrant populated areas, and I happen to be really fond of Korean food. There's even a wonderful Korean sauna near me that I go, and I don't go there enough, but sometimes I go there after record dates. I'm in the studio all day, and I just go in the sauna and get in the different, you know, pools, and I love that. And that's something I do when I'm in Japan. If I have a day off, I go to the Japanese bath and I just, you know, try to get all the kinks out. So, what I do in New York, yeah, I produce a lot of projects for singers. You know, I'm sort of known as an accompanist and arranger for singers, and I love doing that. I mean, I've done the last 10 or so records with Freddie Cole, who's, you know, the baby brother of Nat King Cole. I also work with, among the singers I work with, Janice Siegel. I did her last solo project, and we also have a Brazilian project together with a percussionist from Bahia. His name is Nani Assis, and that's called the Requincha Trio. It's a name nobody can pronounce, and I love doing that kind of work. But you know, I also play in an instrumental context as well, and do touring, which is based out of New York. I mean, before the holidays, I had like grueling weeks of touring. I was in Japan for 2 weeks, and then I was in India, and then I was in Switzerland, and then the Czech Republic and Austria, and then I came back for the Christmas holiday and spent a couple of days with my family in Philadelphia, so balance it out, you know.
Okay. Well, please tell me how you became a professional musician. In 2 minutes, please. And,
sure.
And how music became such a strong, alive part in your universe.
Well, I think, you know, there's influences on me that led me to music. My mother, for example, an amateur singer. But I think it starts with my brother. He's 9 years older, and he was involved in theater. So growing up in the home, I was always hearing, you know, I'm born in 1959, so growing up in the home, I'm always hearing classic musicals. In fact, to this day, when I hear music from West Side Story, I have a very strong emotional reaction because it reminds me of my childhood, you know. But I also grew up with bizarre things like directed by Peter Brook, I forget who wrote the music, Mara Sad, you know, which is the bizarre fantasy about a meeting between Jean-Paul Marat and Marquis de Sade. And it takes place in an insane asylum. It's very bizarre. So it's funny, somebody was just talking about that. So as a little kid, I'm singing the songs from this bizarre musical. But, you know, all the other musicals, Gypsy, Fiddler on the Roof. So a lot of theater music was in my head. But my brother, the pivotal point was when my brother introduced me to the music of Frank Zappa. I remember it was a record called Hot Rats. It fascinated me. And I wanted to play saxophone or violin. They're still my favorite instruments. The piano is not my favorite instrument. So at the time, I was in the public school system. They didn't have any more saxophones. They had violin. So I started on violin. That's my first instrument. I'm about 12 years old. But at the same time, I'd see in the liner notes of Frank Zappa's music, he'd talk about Charles Mingus, Eric Dolphy, all these other musicians, Edgar Varese. I started to want to research jazz, and I started to fall in love with jazz, really, as a 12-year-old. So then I had my mother feeding me records, and I had two older cousins who had they were heavy jazz fans. They had extensive record collection. And they were feeding me records. Actually, they would let me browse through their, we're talking about LPs at the time, and I'd be pulling out records, listening to new things. I remember I had a book. It was a pictorial history of jazz. And each week, my parents would give me a little allowance of like $5 a week. I would go to the record store, and I'd say, well, I don't have a Sonny Rollins record. I have to get a Sonny Rollins record this week. Oh. Roland Kirk. I have to get a Roland Kirk record. So I was building a collection, and I was learning. And I could tell you my first experience with improvisation was playing the blues, because another person I was listening to was John Mayall. And so I was playing blues harp and violin, playing blues. But at the same time, I realized that I wanted to learn about the more complex harmony that jazz is. So I didn't really start formally studying the piano until I was 15. But I would always run to the piano and play it, whatever. And at the same time, when I was 15, I also started playing professionally, you know, like in a little band that played in weddings. So it actually starts when I'm 15 years old. And around that time, I had started to get interest in Latin music. I had friends turning me on to that. And also around that same age, I started to play in salsa bands in Philadelphia. So it was a great place to grow up because I was exposed to jazz, Latin music, Afro-American Baptist churches. You know, I was learning about gospel music. There was a lot to derive from, you know. I hope I put that together in a cohesive way, but all that was going on at the same time. And I started to study with a very famous teacher in Philadelphia, a guy named Jimmy Amadei. He has a book about harmony that's sort of well known. And then years later, I started to study, well, not that many years later, I was 19, I studied with Lenny Tristano. You know, you go through different periods in your youth. There was a point, when I was 19 years old, I was obsessed with that music. I was just listening to Lenny Tristano and Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh. And I have a little period where I kind of got into that, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, my next question is actually about that, about your very special teachers in that early period of your life, which were Lenny Tristano and Don Sebesky. And
later on Don Sebesky.
And Lee Konitz. Yeah. Can you explain me the magic for you, how you found these teachers and what they gave you, what still colors your way of being a musician today?
I feel like just there's something in my approach to linear improvisation that fascinated me about Lenny Tristano. I came to him through Lee Konitz. I had first really fallen in love with the playing of Lee Konitz. And someone said to me, well, if you're interested in Lee Konitz, you should learn about Tristano. And I then learned about the whole school. I never became, though, a total disciple of the school. Like, they sort of had a very insulated, almost a cult, But I remember going to concerts at Tristano's home. I remember seeing we just lost her, Connie Crothers. And I still have a memory. I used to always tell Connie, may she rest in peace, when I see her. I was only 19 years old, but she would read these poems and sort of free improvise. And I remember she had this poem about inspiration. It would keep building and building. She'd be playing, and at the end, she let out this orgasmic scream. And as a 19-year-old, I thought that was the most amazing thing I ever saw. And may she rest in peace, but every time I see her, I remind her about that. She liked that, I think. But Lenny's approach was to take great jazz solos and to sing along with the recordings, and not just to match the notes. But I remember my second lesson, I had learned a Lee Konitz solo, and he said, yeah, you've got all the notes. He said, but I want to hear, he told me he wanted to hear more of the feeling. He said, in his own words, he said, I want you to grab something of the soul of the man. He said, whatever the hell that is, He had a very colorful way of speaking. I'm leaving out the expletives. I remember one really funny thing he told me, because he spoke in a kind of a archaic bebop jargon. I was telling him something like, I said, I want to have a continuous flow of ideas when I play. And he said to me, man, that's in your wig. He said, turn your wig off. I didn't understand that at all. And then he elaborated. He was saying, when you're playing, just let it happen. Don't criticize your playing while you're playing. He said, because the thing about music is it happens so fast, action and time is so fast, that you can easily get in the past. You really have to be in the moment. What Carlos Castaneda, in the books about Don Juan, he said, the mood of the warrior. You're totally present. Because once you stop to think about it, oh, I shouldn't have played that note. Already like 5 bars have gone by and you're in the past.
What about Don Sebesky?
I took his class and did some tutelage with him, and I feel like his approach to teaching opened up writing and orchestration for me. I feel like like my teacher in Philadelphia, Jimmy Amadei, he had a way of giving you a point of departure, and then, you take how far you go is up to the individual student,
And do you still feel his presence somehow in your way of being a musician?
No, I don't feel like I'm necessarily influenced by his writing, no. But I feel like, I think his writing is great. I probably listened a lot more to Gil Evans and to Claus Ogerman. Oh, Claus Ogerman, both of them. I love Claus Ogerman's writing so much that there's some of the things that he did with Jobim. If I start playing the track over and over again. I got to hear that again, Or those intros for João Gilberto and Amoroso. Oh my God, I can play the intro over and over again and not get to the song. That's how beautiful it is. I never had a chance to meet him. I think he lives in Munich and not so active anymore, but I would love to just shake his hand.
Okay, Well, let's come to the next chapter. That's the Latin music. Please explain how you got fascinated and somehow addicted. And you also became yourself a very strong pillar in possibilities of the Latin way of playing music. You played with Ray Barretto. You recorded with him 4 albums. You were lead of his New World Spirit band. Then you played with Bobby Sanabria for 10 years. You also played with Paquito de Rivera.
Patato Valdez, I have a record with him, recorded in Germany.
Okay, yeah.
At Ludwigsburg.
Wow.
Bauer Studio.
Very famous.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Well, can you tell me what you learned from Ray Barretto and Bobby Sanabria? And can you also describe them for me a little bit? What fascinates you about them?
Latin music for me, it starts in high school. I had some Latin friends that were turning me on to the music, and I started to fall in love. Like I said, I was really young. I was about 15 years old. I started to play in like a salsa band, and we were just doing covers of the salsa music at that time, which of the 70s was an amazing time. And ironically, I really believe in this laws of attraction, because I listened a lot to Ray Barretto, I listened a lot to Patato, and I wound up playing with both of those people years later. But there's a big chasm in my playing of Latin music. I got away from it, and I didn't start playing it again until I moved to New York in 1988. And it's weird how I got into it. I used to play in this classic ballroom, the Rainbow Room. It's actually a famous old room. It's in the Embassy building, you know, in Rockefeller Center. There's an American band and there's a Latin band. And I started with the American band, but then the Latin band realized that I could play Latin music. I started to play with them. And it was kind of a silly gig, you know, mostly playing tangos and cha-chas for, very wealthy old women. And, you know, they would have these hired gigolos that would be their dancing partners, kind of funny, you know. But in the band, amazing musicians, great flute player, Mauricio Smith, who had played with Machito, great bass player, Victor Venegas, who was in the original group of Mango Santa Maria, amazing percussionists from Cuba, Virgilio Martí, who recorded with Patato. So it's through that band that I met Bobby Sanabria. And playing with Bobby, there's a lot, my knowledge of Latin music really solidified, because I was doing a lot of things as a teenager by instinct. I didn't totally have an intellectual understanding. I had a visceral understanding, because, you know, if you're playing in those grooves in a dance situation, it's the best place to learn, because people are dancing. So you're playing this groove for like an hour and a half. You're brainwashed. You go home. Ding, 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 ding. It doesn't stop. But that's the way to really internalize it. So I feel like it got into my DNA. So I feel very grateful for that experience. But when I got to New York, you know, Bobby is such an amazing, he has such an amazing pedagogy. He's a great educator. You know, it's a real forte for him. So I was able to really solidify my knowledge. And after playing with him, I got to meet Patato Valdez. I later on played with Patato, made a record with him, and then later on I played with Ray Barretto. Now from Ray Barretto, I learned so much, because his concept was so deep. He's not the average conga player. First of all, he knows every song in the American songbook. I mean, lyrics, everything. It was amazing. He could stump, I know that he did stump Tony Bennett. The year that they both got the Jazz Masters, he stumps Tony Bennett several times. He says, Tony, do you remember this tune? No, he didn't, you know. Recording with him, I learned so much. Because, like I said, conceptually, he had such an amazing overview of music. I wish I had his appetite for listening to music. He had a $1 million stereo system, and he listened to everything. I remember once he was asking me, he said, "John, do you have a recording of Ravel's Valses Nobles and Sentimentales?" I said, "Yes, I have one." And his response was that he had 5 recordings, because he was always listening, comparing. It was amazing. His appetite for music and what he held in his head. So recording with him was a great experience. Arranging for him was a great experience. We'd have long phone conversations where I'd play things over the phone. "How was that, Ray?" And he'd say, "No, try this, try this." Even I would transcribe things. He'd sing to me, "No, try this way." He'd even compose that way. He'd sing things to me, and I'd be transcribing, from the telephone. He'd say, "Okay, we need a bridge. Try this. Okay, you harmonize it." It was very fascinating to work with him, because he would have a contour of the entire arc of the arrangement. And I learned so much, and he liked my work, but I learned so much from the feedback from him, because he had such great experience, I feel very grateful for that, and I often reflect on that. In fact, I work a lot with the drummer that played in the band, Vince Cherico, and we often reflect on our times with Ray. Well, Papa, we called him, because he called everybody else Papa. He'd say, "Papa, I want you to do this, Papa." He was a very complex person, very complex. I mean, which sometimes could make him difficult to deal with, but that was part of the package, And that complexity, I think, made him very interesting at the same time. I think you couldn't get one without the other,
And is there something very specific what you learned from them? Just something really, really clear?
Well, with Ray, I think I learned a sense of overview and a sense of focus, because I tend to throw maybe too many ideas in the pot. And Ray, my relationship with Ray, he was like, "No, we're going to do this. We're not going to do that." I said, "Yes, sir." So I think he helped focus me in that way,
And Bobby?
Bobby, how do I describe Bobby's personality? I have to think about that one. Like I said, Bobby is very dynamic. Bobby has a tremendous sense he's got a great combination of a tremendous sense of show business, but also is very informative and very enlightening, I remember once, where were we? We were playing the Chicago Festival, and it's being recorded on NPR radio, and he says to the audience, because there would always be a segment at the end when he would invite the audience to dance, and he'd say, "It's your duty to shake your booty." And the bass player, Boris, and I, we always remember that and laugh about that. Boris Kozlov was playing bass, We eventually had a quartet it was Quartetto a Che, which I actually saw some clips online. It was quite a great quartet. It was Jay Collins on saxophone, who now mostly plays with pop music, He plays with Duane Allman and sometimes with Steely Dan, Donald Fagen, he's kind of got involved in. Boris Kozlov on bass, and myself, and of course Bobby. But Bobby, he's an extremely dynamic force in education, because there's so much clarity and so much knowledge. I mean, there are some great players that can never be as articulate. You learn more from example with them but they couldn't sit and explain. I mean, Potato, for example, I mean, a great genius in the music and a great character, but whether he's speaking Spanish or English, no one can ever understand what he's saying. So it's difficult in an education situation, but very entertaining.
Yeah. Well, Latin music is has a lot of fire inside. Mm-hmm. There's a lot about movement, and of course, people like to dance with good Latin music. Mm-hmm. Do you dance yourself as well?
No, I have some kind of cognitive block with that. I can do I'm a little bit of a rumbero, but I never really learned the salsa dance. But I'll tell you, Ray Barretto's concept was quite different. We always went for a sense of mystery. In fact, sometimes he gave a signal to the drummer. He would lay out, and we would just go to straight ahead, or we would just go to space, like kind of I use this word, an ECM style sort of space, and then we'd go back in the groove. The clave would go out the window. This was a unique thing with Ray, how we approached Latin jazz. The sort of problem with Latin jazz, when I say problem, is that it can inhibit the improvisation. The rhythm section can be on pilot, ding, 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 and not really interacting with the solos. Quite the opposite. We would change the color and sometimes take the rhythm totally out. So there was a lot of interaction. Some of the other people in Latin music didn't like it because they're like, what happened to the groove? In fact, there was one time we were playing, and I'm not sure if this was after me or when I was on the gig. It was after me. Ray was going on the bandstand after Chickaria's band. And Ray and Chick cross paths, and Chick said to Ray told me this, he said, "Ray, make me dance." And Ray's response was, he said, "Chick, I hope to disappoint you." That gives you an idea of Ray's personality.
Yeah. Well, you have a very, 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 very busy schedule. You're performing, you're playing, you educate, and you are everywhere and all the time. You explained it already earlier. So music is everywhere in your life, and related to music a lot. Do you ever experience silence?
Oh yes, silence is very important to me. It's extremely important. Most listening is done in my car, but even then, silence is extremely important to me. Yeah, or I like to listen to the BBC. I find the news, so a spoken word. I need that. I know musicians that on their night off they go out and hear music. I always feel like I need some silence or some other input. I'll go and look at some beautiful art or some beautiful paintings, so I can clear out and be fresh again. Yeah, I can definitely experience burnout, so that's extremely important to me.
Yeah. Well, I just have another general question. How do you treat a composition of others? Like choosing a material for a performance, for a project. Let's say, how do you treat compositions of Antonio Carlos Jobim or Joao Donato or Rodgers and Hammerstein or Ornette Coleman? How do you start working with this material, and what are the first steps to make them your own way, in a way?
Well, I'm a firm believer. First of all, you need to learn the compositions, but even before that, there's something that attracts you to want to learn them. But what I was going to say, I'm a firm believer that whatever you're going to play, you can make it your own. And I always take license with with music, you know. I like to learn it thoroughly first, but I feel like once it's in your hands, it's yours. And it's funny, even classical musicians, I think the greatest ones, they think this way. Even though every note is written out, they have to commit to the score. But there's so much room for interpretation. You listen to different interpretations, and I think this is what gives it life. This is not disrespecting the composer. It's kind of, I think of it like acting. You know, you could have different actors in the same role, but for them to make it real, they have to somehow process it through themselves, you know? So I think this is a part of the process, you know? And I like to do everything organically. Like, I don't like to force, you know, how different can I make this? How different can I make it from the original? You know, you know, if it's not broke, I won't fix it. But I just find naturally you tend to vary things to make them your own. And I think that's the real spirit of jazz, is finding that individual voice and how that affects everything you play, you know.
Okay. Well, you have also a very strong connection and a love for other composers that are always, again, part of your program. And I just want to mention two giant composers for you that are Thelonious Monk and Billy Strayhorn.
Right.
Can you please describe them and also tell me a little bit about their magic for you?
Sure. You know, I probably the first Strayhorn piece that I learned, I was a teenager, and one of my older cousins said, "I'd love to hear you, you know, play Lush Life, learn Lush Life." And I had a recording of, duo recording of Chet Baker from the 50s, Chet Baker and Russ Freeman, just playing a duo. So I had learned that, but the next piece that really caught my imagination, and it's very interesting where I heard it, you wouldn't expect it. You know, I'm from Philadelphia, and back in the 70s, Grover Washington Jr., who became like one of the fathers of smooth jazz, right? He had a big hit, a record called Mr. Magic. Everybody knows it. Okay, the track that probably hardly got played on the radio, there's an arrangement of Passionflower by Bob James with a string orchestra that is one of the most luscious, intoxicating arrangements. Grover plays it on soprano. He had a very unique, very beautiful soprano sound. It's not at all like Kenny G. No, it's a beautiful sound. And I remember being fascinated by this. So that's the first time I heard Passionflower. Later on, I got to hear, you know, as the Johnny Hodges feature. I think I first heard, there's a Duke recording, Duke Ellington playing a trio. So this fascination for the music of Billy Strayhorn started early on. And in more recent years, a venue I play at a lot in New York, Jazz at the Kitano. It's a jazz club in the Kitano Hotel. The gentleman that curates, his name is Gino Moratti, who curates the music there, had asked me to do a Strayhorn program. And he always wanted to have Paquito de Rivera in the club. And he said, "Why don't you add a soloist?" And I said, "How about Paquito?" And I called Paquito up, and he actually, at the time, he wasn't that familiar with the music of Strayhorn. But I've made him a devotee. He's fallen in love with it. And that's how this whole process started, you know. Now, as for Thelonious Monk, I actually have, you know, I have 13 CDs on the Venus label, which are listed as John di Martino's Romantic Jazz Trio. But one is the music of Monk, and it has the title that throws people off, Magical Mystery. But it's not the music of the Beatles, because I actually have two with Beatles music. I did a recording of Monk. My feeling about Monk is, you know, I feel like his great innovation to jazz is as a composer. And I don't attempt to imitate him at all. In fact, I try to play them in a very Chopinesque way, and I feel like you can. I feel like this is a test of really beautiful, significant music. You don't have to imitate Monk. You know, you don't have to sound like you have your elbow on the piano. You know, you could play them, like I said, a la Chopin. You know, and they're still beautiful, and I think Monk would be happy. I said this to T.S. Monk, his son. I said, I don't try to imitate, and I feel like he admired that. He doesn't like hearing pianists try to imitate Monk, you know, because it's kind of like whenever you imitate, it's, in a way, imitation, if you take it to a certain extent, it can be sort of disrespectful. It's kind of like a caricature, you know. It's almost like you're mocking the person, you know.
Great. Yes. Yeah. Well, when you play the piano, and I saw you now for the first time some days ago, I noticed you also play with all your body. You start to dance somehow, and also you even use your arm like a percussion element.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit your way of playing? How is this going? How free are you to do what you want to do or what you do?
I might be less aware of that than I realize, but you know, the piano, I actually is a classical teacher that I studied with, Sophia Rossoff, a little bit, and she made me understand that the piano is essentially a glorified xylophone, and that there's a lot you can learn from drummers. Drummers know that if you tense up, you can't play, you know. And it takes pianists many years to understand that, you know. We're sort of trying to play the piano like a violin, you know. We kind of get addicted to tension. But the more looser you are and the more you think of it as a percussion instrument, even what we call legato, it's really a rhythm. It's really a rhythm that connects the notes, you know. So I try to stay in that very open space, you know. But I do, before I play, my prayer is that I say, I want to surrender to the, you know, the ecstatic beauty of the music, because if I can feel that ecstatic feeling, then I can hopefully transmit it to the audience. But I need to get there first, you know. So I play from within, but you know, also to bring it without. I feel like I go within to find the answers of, because you know, each piece of music you play, there's a certain character, and I'm always trying to unlock that door to get like deep inside it, you know. I don't know if I'm always successful, but I'm always trying to find where that door is.
But do you also have the idea that you are playing the piano, or is the piano playing you?
Well, when the music is at its best, you feel like you become selfless when it's at the best. In fact, the more self that's in there, the more you're in the way. I understand what Tristano said to me. He said, don't try to make it happen, let it happen. And we often get in our own way. And there's so many things that get in your own way. You know, we're self-conscious, or we have negative feelings about ourselves, which somebody made me aware, in a way, it's a kind of, even though you might be thinking something very bad about yourself, it's a kind of narcissism in a way, because you're totally centered on yourself. And the thing is to like focus out. It's weird. Focus in and focus out at the same time. Like a spiritual focus in, you know.
Yeah. Well, I have a request.
Yes.
Can you please hum for me an instant melody, maybe just dedicated to this interview, and maybe a little bit the Latin way?
Sure, whatever comes out. Bia di 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 da de de di 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 de. Bia yi di di da ye vede vede. Fa bo bo vi ye. Va budu vodi Fiada ue.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, of course, music is not just playing notes. Music also exists because of the space between the notes.
Yes.
Can you please explain space in music and time and timing for me?
Space is so important because it defines what's between the space. In fact, as an educator, I can't tell you how much I'm preaching that. To me, sublime example, the great Miles Davis. It's often the novice player wants to immediately fill the space. Oh, it's my solo, I have to do something, I have to fill the space. You can tell Miles never played to impress. It looked like he never cared what the audience or anybody around him was thinking. But he would always, you can see him always going into that internal space where he's listening, you know, what does the universe want me to play next? And he'll lay out 2 bars, he'll lay out until that message from the universe comes and he'll play. And you see no anxiety or anxiousness about, oh, I've got to fill the space, I've got to fill the space. Think of it if we all played that way or just lived our lives that way, because so much comes to you in the meditative silence, you know. It's interesting, like, even in our life, you know, if we think like, if you're going to walk into a room, before you walk into the room, if you think, oh, it might be danger in the room, you know, so, you know, you might clutter your idea with, you might clutter your mind with all these thoughts. What happens is you actually clutter up the universe, whereas if you keep yourself open, you don't know what bounties might come to you when you walk in that room, you know. So it's sometimes really bad to speculate. It's another example. So I like to use space when I'm feeling at my best. I feel like I use space a lot. I'm really tuned into that. When I write, when I arrange, I like to come from a very sparse place. My first approach is, what's the least I can do? You know, like if I write an arrangement, I might say, well, I gotta have something at the bridge. So I write something at the bridge. Let's say I'm writing an orchestral arrangement. Then I might say, I should have a little something in the second A that leads to the bridge. And then I might go back and say, I need a little something at the cadence of the first A that leads to what's in the second A. But I like to start from a very minimal place and add. And I tell students, this is something, it's very important when accompanying. When I'm teaching about accompanying, I tell them, think about this, what's the least you can do and still feel like you should get paid? Instead of, you know, the kitchen sink, you know. So space is very important, is what I was trying to say.
And what about time?
Time is very important, yeah. Time is groove, hello. And what is groove? There's no scientific equation that gives us groove. Groove is something that really has to be felt through the heart. You have to fall in love with it and live with it so much that it becomes part of you, you know?
Yeah. Well, you have also a very strong connection with Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Did this connection change your understanding of beauty, and if, how?
No, you know, my connection with Japan is many years now. I've been recording for a Japanese label, and also I tour there either every year or every other year. I was just there in November with saxophonist Harry Allen, and bassist and singer Nicky Parat, and it's fun to play there. People are really into the music, and I think for the Japanese culture, which in some ways can be so rigid, jazz and the spirit of jazz is maybe a chance for their spirit to dance, to feel more open. And I feel this spiritual connection with the people that come to the venues to hear the music. And I think they look for that. They look for that, this idea of opening the heart, you know? And it's something that's maybe sometimes not so easy in Japanese culture, but through the music, they feel like they can experience this, you know? And I feel that, I feel this need, and it's very moving.
Okay. Can you please explain me how you compose? What do you need to have in a proper composition? How does composing work? And where do ideas come from?
Well, the last thing that I composed that I was very happy with, I discovered a new approach for me. Rather than just pick something out of the air, I found I had, for this particular project, I had listened to some Gregorian chant, a prayer piece, and I transcribed it. And then I sit for a minute and I let myself react to that. And what I composed sort of has no, you wouldn't hear any relationship to the Gregorian chant, but somehow it was my jazz way of responding to that. And I thought, wow, what an interesting approach to composition. Find anything, I don't know, a Bulgarian folk song, whatever excites you, transcribe it, and then sit back for a minute. I went for Gregorian chant in this project because it was a project that had something to do with it had something to do with Madonna, but not the original Madonna, the Madonna, the pop star Madonna. And I had to compose something that went with its theme. So I thought, okay, Madonna, and I listened to a Gregorian chant that was specifically for the original Madonna. And but at the time when another thing, so I thought that was an interesting part of the process. Take something as a point of departure, because you can mutate it and it becomes your own, you know. I mean, think about Bartók, you know. He would take Hungarian folk songs and folk songs all in that area, Romanian folk songs, and I'm sure they began to mutate. They were like they were inspirations for so much of his compositions, you know. So that's something I want to explore more.
Okay, well, for my idea, you play so rich. You have so much to say in music.
Thank you.
When can we expect a solo recording?
Hopefully soon. You're not the only one that's asked me for that. So I need to work on it. I've been a big procrastination for me. So I need to stop procrastinating. In fact, there's a studio in New York that the manager of the studio recently called me and he said, John, when are you going to do that solo record? So, so it's time. Thank you for asking.
Let me know.
I will.
Please. Can you tell me what is the most beautiful sound you ever experienced? Is there something like that?
Wow. Wow, a bunch of things come to mind. The first time I heard music of Bartók, I was about 13 years old. It was a recording of the contrasts for violin, piano, and clarinet, which is a piece commissioned by Benny Goodman. Also, a really beautiful sound to me is Von Karajan's recording the Berlin Philharmonic of Also Sprach Zarathustra. I love that. Right after the opening, that next passage, oh boy. But geez, there's a lot of beautiful sounds. When it comes to Billy Strayhorn, the recording of the big band recording of Blood Count. I think that's one of the most intoxicating pieces and arrangements I've ever heard. Yeah, amazing. It's on that record dedicated to Strayhorn. It's called, and his mother called him Bill. You know, it's really beautiful.
Okay.
He wrote that on his deathbed, actually.
Yeah. Well, on the album cover of your record from 2012, I think the album is called Turn Around.
Oh, yes.
There's written a quote from Daisaku Ikeda.
Yes.
And he's a Japanese writer and philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
Music speaks directly to the heart. This response, this echo within the heart, is proof that human hearts can transcend the barriers of time, space, and nationality, which is beautiful.
Really beautiful.
What is your connection with Daisaku Ikeda and his ideas? Are you related somehow with Buddhism?
Yes, I actually, for the past several years, I've been practicing Buddhism, Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism. But I believe all spiritual practices are one, really. Yeah. But I've been chanting for quite a long time, you know. Of course, my idol pianist is Herbie Hancock, and he's been doing that even much longer than me. I had an interesting experience shortly after I started practicing Buddhism. I was in the middle of an interview, actually, with someone else, and the phone kept ringing, the same person. So I finally picked it up. It seemed like an emergency. And I hear this friend of mine, this woman, she's from Italy, Fulvia. She actually introduced me to Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism. I hear her say, there's a pianist who just started chanting. Would you speak to him? And next thing I know, Herbie Hancock's voice is on the phone. I was, you know, I froze up. And it's Herbie Hancock speaking to me. And he said to me, he gave me like a 5-minute pep talk. You know, he doesn't really know me. He said, John, your life is going to become so much focused now. And I kind of froze. This is my idol. And I said, yeah, I've been thinking about focusing more, you know, and he said to me, well, I guess I said the right things, you know. It's a great experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Then I want to know from you, who are you in private when there is new music around, if this exists? What are you doing further in life?
Well, I love, my other passion is film. I love film, and I want to get more involved in film scoring. I did a couple years ago, I scored some series of documentaries. It was an Austrian production. They were actually sort of like travel documentaries. These were about restoration of gardens all through the Islamic world. But I love film. I also love language that I want to dedicate more time to, you know. Other than that, I love to walk and I like biking.
And I heard that you also love poetry, right?
Yeah, but I'm also I'm a big fan of food.
What kind of?
Well,
is it the Italian one?
No, not at all. I lean more toward Asian cuisine. You know, I'm allergic to dairy and wheat, so Asian cuisine, traditional Asian cuisine, is best for me. You know, but I do eat a lot of Korean food.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this interesting talk.
Thank you.
And I wish you good luck with all.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah.